Hey there, welcome to the RTS Guided Programming Coaching Call. I'm Mike Tushir. I got a bunch of questions to answer today, although hopefully not quite as many as last week. So let's go on and get started. First question up is a follow-up from last week. This one says, as you know, I only competed just over 3 weeks ago with a modified meet date delayed from the original plan by 3 weeks. With that in mind, would you still recommend testing in early October as you mentioned last week? I ask because there's a possible meet on October 3rd, 10 weeks after my recent meet, which I would happily do if we are testing anyway. However, I'm also happy to wait until the 21st of November, which will be 17 weeks after my recent meet. That's the meet that I'm more interested in doing. I'm just interested to know what plan you'd go with at this situation, bearing in mind my most recent contest, and how how that works out with the two meets being close together. Well, in this case, I recommend that let's go ahead and wait until let's give it a couple more weeks on your current plan, and then we are going to recalibrate your training and aim toward that November contest. That's the one that you're more interested in doing anyway. That'll give you a little bit more buffer training time. So that's what we're going to do. We're just not quite to the point yet where we want to open up contest dates for all of November. That'll probably be in another couple weeks. So when we get there, I'll make sure to let everybody know. Send in your meet date and we'll get you specialized training for that contest. This question says, first of two, do you put any stock into tracking relative strength in different lifts, such as front squat should be 85% of your back squat, military press should be 60% of your bench press, etc. And if the ratios are off, it hints that one has unbalanced musculature. Do you have any of your own rules of thumb? The reason I ask is because according to those metrics floating around, I am way unbalanced. For instance, my deadlift is around 140% of my squat. Back in 2009 when I did Westside style program, I hit my all-time best bench. Could only military press about 45% of my touch and go bench. Later I switched to weightlifting for 2 years, and the crazy shoulder volume increased shoulder strength from that period allowed me to bench around 95% of my all-time best without benching at all, hinting that shoulders were always keeping me back, and I guess still are. Interesting question. So the original context of the question is, do I put any stock into tracking relative strength numbers, ratios between lifts? The quick answer there is no, I don't. I haven't seen anything that really looks like robust data to me, or not even data, but just robust information to me that could be used to derive those types of ratios. For instance, somebody that squats with a narrow stance is going to have, going to place a greater demand on quad strength than somebody who squats with a wide stance, low bar, hips back type of pattern. Somebody with long femurs and it gets really bent over in the squat is going to have more, it's going to require more hip strength than somebody with short femurs who squats very upright. So there's a lot of individual differences that would affect and drive what those ratios should be. So I don't think the ratios really hint at much of anything. I think they just are what they are. However, what we do perform for our athletes is weak point analysis. That's not part of the guided programming, although send in your videos and we do weak point analysis for that. It just doesn't get built back into the program. That's something for you guys to do. So send in your videos, we'll talk about it, we'll diagnose your weak points, and we'll talk about what sorts of changes you need to make to your program in terms of exercise selection, things like that. However, for our performance coaching clients, we do feedback that type of information back into the program. We specialize all the exercise selection designed to target weak points and things like that. So in the specific case that you outlined, where you had an overhead press that was apparently holding you back on the bench, which may or may not be true. But let's say for argument purposes it is. We would evaluate your bench press. It wouldn't necessarily be that we would say shoulders are definitely what's holding you back, but we would rather say your weak range of motion is X. So in this case, let's say 5 to 10 centimeters off your chest, your force output is just lower. So what we would do is we would first design assistance exercises that target that range of motion, because that's the range of motion that you need to practice developing more force in. Also, we know that shoulder strength has a lot to do with that range of motion, so we also prescribe some supplemental shoulder exercises. It's not the supplemental shoulder exercises are not the main drivers. It's there to support, it's there to help. The main drivers are those movements that target weak ranges of motion. So in that case, we're really custom tailoring your exercise selection and really, I guess in some sense, your strength ratios depending on what sorts of displays you show with a heavy lift, because that's our end goal. That's what we're after. Now, if we're talking about general population longevity and stuff like that, then perhaps ratios have more of a role to play. However, that's not really our area, and that's not what we're presuming is your interest if you're enrolled in guided programming. So hope that helps with that one. All right, next question up says, is it okay to do push press instead of shoulder press? Or do you find that the bottom position strength of the military press is important? In general, I've never responded very well to military press, while push press, especially behind the neck, seems to do magic for all of my pressing movements. In a case like this, where you have experience telling you that one variation is better suited for you than another, in this case, push press being an overhead movement that results in more progress than standard military press, go ahead and make that swap. However, I do think that just a strict military press, at least on occasion, is good for well-rounded development. So you're free to do as you like. If you want to swap all the militaries for push presses, be my guest. I would just encourage you to keep some, it doesn't have to be a specific number or anything, but occasionally do some strict military pressing just so that you maintain that ability, just so that you're developing shoulder strength in that bottom position. But in general, if you found better results from push press, that's great, and go with it. I will say that that's not a typical experience. Most powerlifters I've worked with have not had great results from push press. Some do, and again, I think it's important to overload that movement, especially in terms of developing overhead strength over a longer period of time. So that's why push press stays in there. But if that's your experience, that push press is good, then go with it. Just kind of offering up that that's not a typical experience, so just be cautious about it is all. But yeah, that substitution will be fine. All right, next question up says, when you're saying to move to a percentage, is that based off a top set or an estimated daily max? That's a good question, legit question. It's also one that we've answered a couple times in the past. So I would encourage you guys to make sure that you're searching the forums as well. You can get an answer to your questions a lot faster. Of course, if you don't find it or can't find it or it's not coming up or whatever, it's no problem. Send in your questions. I'm happy to answer them. If you send it in 100 times, I'll answer it 100 times. It'll just take us a little while to get to it. That's all. So this question, let's work through an example. Let's say that you've got squat. We want you to work up to a single at an 8. Then drop to, let's say 80%, and it'll say something like -12. And then NL equals, let's say, sorry, there will be a rep number for this. So let's say 80% triples. Number of lifts is going to be 21. That's not realistic. What is it? It's 24, I believe. Okay, so just going off memory for that. But what would this look like? Well, the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to work up to your single. So that happens pretty normally. You do your general warm-up and you ramp up the weights. You know, you might take, I don't know, 30, 50, 70, then you'll get to 80, you know, for a single, and that'll be at, you know, I don't know, a 6 or something like that. So we're not really counting that as a work set. But then, you know, when you get to your real work sets, you ramp your weight up, you get to something like 92 for a single, and that's 8. Okay, there you go, top single. Now I want you to drop to a percentage. It's 80% for a triple, but that's 80% of your 1 rep max, your 1 rep max on this day for a triple. Now we don't, it's kind of a pain to calculate your 1 rep max, your estimated 1 rep max on the fly in the gym at that moment. So that's what that number in parentheses is about. I want you to take 12% of the weight off the bar. So in this case, I picked these numbers so that it's a little bit easier math for us. So if you did 92 kilos for a single at an 8 RPE, that's going to equal 100 for a single at a 10 RPE or thereabout. That's the estimation. So from there, if you drop 12% from 92, that gets you to 80. 80 is also 80% of your 1 rep max. So it works out. So and then you would do, 80% for a triple. You would do 7 triples. Because 7 triples is going to equal 21 total repetitions, plus your single is going to give you 22 repetitions. And that's as close as we can get to this without going over. So that's where we stop. So let's go through another example, but this time, same protocol, but this time let's say that we go to 175 for a single at 8. So now we need to reduce the weight by 12% to get to this 80%. So this one's not quite as clear cut, you know, so we don't just drop to 80%. So what's your estimated 1 rep max if you can do 175 for a single at 8? It turns out we don't have to calculate it. We can just drop 12% from 175. So get my calculator. So if we have 175 times 12%, 0.12, 21. So we're going to remove 21 kilos from the bar. We'll round that off to 20. So that means we're going to do 155 for triples. And then we'll do 7 triples. So this equals 80% of 1 rep max. I hope that was clear. That's probably the most involved explanation that we've had for it so far. So yeah, hopefully that helps clear up what we're asking for there. All right, this question says, I have a set of microplates that allow me to adjust the weight on the bar in 1.25 pound increments. How precise should I be when choosing a top set and workup weights? Is it worth using microplates to be as exact as possible, or is it not so important? I think it depends on who we're talking about and what weights we're talking about. We want you to get pretty close, but all the percentages and everything like that, they're just estimations. The whole idea is to get you to put the right weight on the bar and do it the right amount of times, do the right amount of work. So when you see things like 80% for triples or, you know, a 5% load drop or something like that, they're basically estimations. Now, where the microplates become important is with people who are, let me think. So if you are less than 100 kilos, your 1 rep max is less than 100 kilos on any movement, then microplates are important. And really, if you get to the point where you're less than 150 kilos, microplates are probably useful. So I mean, if you think about it, let's take a lightweight female who's benching around 60 kilos. So for her, um, you know, a jump of 2.5 kilos represents a pretty big percentage, you know, whereas a jump for somebody who's, you know, benching 150 kilos is much less of a percentage. So the lower your 1 rep max, the more important those microplates are. And 100 kilos is actually a good cutoff. If you're lifting less than 100 pounds, it's really important to be using those microplates. So in general, for most of you, I don't think it'll be an issue, but for some of you, it could be. If you're in that situation, get some microplates, throw them in your gym bag. And it's not just for this program, it's for any program. Like I said, the important thing is to get you to put the right weight on the bar and do it the right number of times. And if your only option is like these, you know, 5% swings in loading, you know, well, your physiological output varies more than 5% per day a lot of times, you know, or at least over the course of a training cycle, it will. So it can be really important over the long term to have those. That's a good tool to have, especially for your smaller lifters, maybe your more novice lifters, people that just basically aren't lifting that much weight. Next question up says, I like to keep track of my volume. Do you include the warm-up sets when calculating your volume or number of lifts? Especially working up to heavy singles, there's a lot of warm-up volume. It depends on the question. Depends on how we're framing this question. So if we're talking about just keeping training data, there's not really a right or wrong way to do it, and lots of coaches have done it different ways over the years. For me, I typically don't track anything under a 6 RPE. That seems to be a good rule of thumb for me to go about it. Now the way that works out is I basically track work sets, and I basically track the sets that are prescribed that you guys get in your weekly training emails. That's the stuff that I track. I know a lot of other coaches track total volume above 50% of 1 rep max. That also seems like a pretty good way of doing it, and it's not, you know, overly restrictive in terms of how an athlete needs to warm up, because some athletes need more warm-ups than others. And how much impact does that volume below 30% of 1 rep max really make, you know, at the end of the day? So I think if I could start over again, I might track it, number of lifts over 50%, just because that allows, you know, kind of a standardization. You can compare your numbers to other people's numbers, different coaches' numbers, and stuff like that. Since I have tracked volume the way that I have, it just means that there's a limited ability to compare volumes to other coaches and other athletes. That's not all bad. I think there's some validity, some internal validity to the way that I do it. But basically, if we're talking about just logging stuff, that's the answer. If we're talking about performing the work, so some of the protocols that I give you guys have a number of lifts requirement. For that, I'm just talking about work sets. I'm, you know, not talking about warm-ups and stuff like that. For instance, if you have a protocol that requires, you know, 24 total repetitions, I'm talking about 24 working repetitions, not, you know, not including warm-ups and stuff like that. All right, this question says, in your RTS manual, you work with specific time blocks per exercise. In the guided program, there's a fixed sets per exercise. Why is there a different approach? Well, just to kind of reframe this a little bit, in the RTS manual, the time blocks just serve as kind of a stopping point. You know, don't go beyond this. it's a way to control your rest periods, really. The real way that we control fatigue and control volume from the RTS manual is using fatigue percents. The reason we don't use fatigue percents in guided programming is because you have access to track. And in my estimation, using a fixed amount of work plus track gets us both better control over your volume and lets us do the kinds of periodization things that we want to be able to do. Plus, we can still auto-regulate based on how your body is responding to the training. The thing about fatigue percents is they tend to be more of a blunt instrument. It allows auto-regulation, but it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not really finely tuned, you know? So there's a lot of ambiguity with fatigue percents, and so that prevents us from doing some of the kinds of periodization things that we'd like to do. So because we are able to pair, fixed volume requirements with an auto-regulating mechanism like track, that kind of gives us a best of both worlds. Okay, next question up says, thanks for the answer during the coaching call. So from what I understood is that RPEs and percent of max should be treated separately. My question then is, how do I come up with a simple to monitor the inputs, volume, intensity, RPE, etc., and the output during the next training session? My max is increasing, decreasing. Days when I have a minor tweak, like my shoulder a month ago, and analyze it in the long term. For example, should I make an Excel spreadsheet and put in the normalized volume you mentioned, RPE, intensity, as well as outputs such as track scores, estimated 1 rep max, etc.? Would that be useful for analysis? So here is an issue that we see more and more, and it's an issue that I've had personally in the past and still kind of deal with from time to time. The problem is that just kind of this total overwhelming response to data. We can kind of, it's called data blindness, and there are a number of authors who have written about data blindness, and just the fact that simply because we have more data doesn't mean that that's any more information, and in a lot of cases that makes us miss the forest for the trees. So let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what are we really interested in here? Does it really matter what your track scores are? Does it really matter what your normalized volume is? No. What we really care about is, are your lifts improving? Are your 1 rep maxes going up? If you're improving, then all the other stuff just doesn't matter. The only time the other stuff is important is as a diagnostic if your lifts are not improving. I would be really cautious about trying to correlate, periods of really improved training results and what the overall parameters of that training block were. So for example, let's say you have a really successful training block and you look at the numbers and say, wow, when I reduced the volume and increased the intensity, my training lifts shot up like crazy. I got way stronger. So that must mean, I need to increase my intensity all the time. And that's a fundamentally different outcome. And you won't see the same type of response because we're dealing with a complex system here. And that's a system that's just responding to a large variety of inputs all the time. So it's not something that we can so easily reduce down to these simple correlations. And now I know that the volume intensity sort of example is maybe not the best example to use because most of you know that sacrificing your volume for higher intensity is a short-term strategy. You know that. But it also affects other things as well. Other things also fall into that category. For instance, you could correlate performance of an assistance exercise. Man, when I added board presses, my bench went up. That must mean that board pressing is good for my bench. It's targeting that weakness. Well, maybe it does. But then again, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's something else that we're not considering. Even if you're controlling all those variables, there's still a training history at play, and no, like we can make estimates and educated guesses on what the washout period is. But, then again, maybe we're wrong about it, and maybe there's other things at play too. Like with these self-experimentation things, it's important to maintain a little humility on what we're actually getting as far as outputs. And Alex, I'm not picking on you in particular, saying that you're committing these, logical errors or anything like that. It's just kind of an overall sense of things. I'm all for tracking the variables, tracking this sort of thing, but just don't make the mistake of thinking that it's going to give you the answers, because it probably won't. At best, it's a pin light in a dark room. We can illuminate some small things using this data if we know where to point it. If we don't, then we're just guessing, and our ability to describe this room is going to not be so great. So I guess what I'm saying is go ahead and track that data. There's nothing wrong with just tracking it. Just don't expect it to yield the answers, because there's a lot of things that are not accounted for in that data. Let me give you another example. When I first got a Tendo unit, I started using it after a while. So at first I just used it, tracked the data, and looked at it, But then after a while I thought, this Tendo data is really heavily correlated to RPE. So what if I stop tracking my subjective RPE and just use the Tendo data? And that's what I did for a long time. Probably a year to 2 years, maybe a little more than that. But then over time, I slowly realized that there are things that are captured with subjective RPE that the Tendo data just doesn't capture. It's bar speed only. And although they correlate well, they don't correlate perfectly. And the things that the Tendo was missing were things that I thought were important to capture. So over time, I've kind of reversed that relationship. Now, subjective RPE, I'm back to the point where subjective RPE is my primary consideration. I use bar speed data to help inform those decisions a little bit. It just kind of influences those decisions, and I've talked about that a little bit in the past as well. The point is, just because we have a way to objectively measure something doesn't mean that that's the thing that matters. So by all means, track it. Let's talk about it if you notice something interesting, but just don't fall victim to a data blindness type of scenario. Next question up says, thanks for offering to help with the game plan. I was planning to just follow the Excel sheet you provided for the lifts. It might be hard to judge where the lifts are, since my left side of my lower back got slightly tweaked about a month ago. I've been doing priority 1 and 2 workouts without deadlifts, and I have a decent idea where my lifts are most likely at. The main thing is I want to get my first meet experience in the books. You're more than welcome to provide any feedback. Originally I was hoping to get greater than 1150, and now be happy with 1100. Bench should be around 285. I think I lost some ground on squats, but could still get a 375, leaving a 440 deadlift. It sounds like you've got a pretty good handle on it. I would input those numbers into the meet card that you have, and let that help you select your attempts and select your game plan. With that said, it's really important to pick realistic, accurate goal weights. I mean, they don't have to be spot on perfect, but the more accurate the goal weight, the better the overall training, the overall meet card can be. The meet card is also supposed to be auto-regulating in nature. we have our opener planned, but then there's an A plan and a B plan for the second and third attempts for each lift. Make sure that you're using those. Like you said, and you already seem to be fully aware that having a good experience for your first meet out, that's the best thing. Make a lot of lifts, leave a little on the platform if you need to. I would rather see you turn in a easy third attempt than a missed third attempt, especially for your first meet out. If you come back and say, man, I really feel like I left 20 kilos on the platform, I'm not going to be upset with that, and I hope you won't be either. That also keep in mind that that's pretty exceedingly rare. It's much more common to find people that have missed weights than it is to find people who've just like left a ridiculous amount of weight on the platform. Not saying it doesn't happen. I know some people have done meets and finished those meets thinking, man, I could have totaled a lot better if I had just picked some bigger numbers. But that's not typically the case. However, with your first meet, I would be a little bit conservative. If you have your choice, then you would want that to be the case for you this first time out. So with that said, good luck. Use that meet card. Do your openers this week, and that'll give you a really good indication on how accurate your goal weights are. And then from there, it's mostly about resting up and peaking and doing a good job over the weekend. So best of luck to you. Let me know if you need anything on as you kind of round out this week. Last question for this week. This one says, during the last call you mentioned that we are ending a certain phase of our yearly plan in October and then entering the next phase. Just wondering what type of phase we're in and then what follows it. Also based on this, when would be the optimal time to plan our next meet after the October-November timeframe of this year? Okay, easy one first. Generally every 3 months we want to have a competition, 3 to 4 months we want to have a competition. Even if it's not a major competition, that would be a good thing to go about. Now, as far as what phase we're in, that's a much harder question to answer just because each group is in a slightly different phase. Let's just kind of simplify it for right now and say that there are prep phases and comp phases. Prep phases tend to be more focused on establishing work capacity and building work capacity. They tend to be focused more on volume. Early prep phases focus on that volume with exercise variety. Late prep phases focus on that volume mostly through highly specific movements. Then you have your comp phases. Comp phases tend to have a little bit more intensity, but really they include overload work so that you're exposed to heavier weights. The push for more volume isn't there as strong for comp phases. However, that exposure to really heavy weights is there. The bigger peak is for the comp phases. So you want to, like I said, you want to plan for these meets about once every 3 to 4 months. Your early comp phases, same thing, includes more exercise variety. Your later comp phases tend to have a lot more specificity. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light. That's like the 2-minute answer on annual planning, and there will be a lot more information to come on annual planning soon. Soon being a really vague and ambiguous answer. But hopefully soon we'll have a lot more information on annual planning available for you guys. I'm thinking the next month to 2 months, probably. All right, so that's it for all the questions this week. If you guys have any other questions, make sure to send those in to me, just like you have been doing. It's a little bit of a shorter call this week, just because the call last week was later in the week, and there hasn't been as much time for you guys to send in questions. So no big deal. I'm gonna try to get back on a schedule of doing these calls live. It's just that the whole moving process has really been throwing a wrench in my plans, and I'm trying to get back onto a regular rhythm. So hopefully that is next week. But I've said that in the past, so hopefully this is the one. With that said, good luck with your training this week. Remember, as always, take what's there, build some momentum, uh, keep this thing going, keep a long-term sustainable progress, keep that stuff in mind. So good luck with your training. I'll talk to you guys next time.